Hello, and we are now doing the time travel episode. I am Alex Seymour, the moderator, and let's just go around and introduce ourselves. Arnold, do you want to lead off?
Sure. I'm Dr. Arnold T. Blumberg. I'm publisher at ATB Publishing, and I've done a whole host of things related to Doctor Who and other pop culture, and you guys probably know me anyway, so you can look me up. That's all I need to say.
Kathryn?
I'm Kathryn Sullivan. I write YA fantasy. I have essays in Chicks Dig Time Lords, Outside In, and Children of Time, Companions to Doctor Who, and major time traveling fan.
And finally, but certainly not least, Tyler.
Hi, Cisco Taylor, and I write contemporary Afrofutures and a lot of nerdy sci-fi. My first book was about time travel. My last book was about a nonfiction piece about growing up being obsessed with Doctor Who. My latest book, I just adapted my second book into a comic, like a graphic novel. Sorry, when I was a kid, they were comic books, so that's what I call it. But yeah, super excited to be here to talk about my favorite subgenre.
So we're going to start off with the classic granddaddy of all the time travel shows that are on TV, Peabody's Improbable History. It was a short on Rocky and Bullwinkle, where the classic scenario was the heroes would go back in time, find a problem, learn a little history, and come back. How many here remember that wonderful show?
Yep.
Go fans. I think, as I said off mic before we got started, Peabody is technically a Time Lord, so it might be a Doctor Who prequel for all we know. Maybe he fits in before the Timeless Child or something like that.
Could be.
But we agree that this...
I came across Rocky and Bullwinkle, though. There was a 1955 Czech movie that was serialized on various children's TV shows in the 60s. And it turned up in my area on Garfield Goose. And it was called Journey to the Beginning of Time. And they had little segments where these boys are traveling down a river back through time. So they came across the mastodons, they came across mammoths, they came across dinosaurs, and there was an epic battle of dinosaur. Let's see, wasn't a T-Rex, it was more with the same time period as Stegosaurus. So they had locked in this epic battle, and the kids the next day went and measured the body of the Stegosaurus. Like, I basically put a little bit of this on one of the online groups, and a lot of other people going, oh yeah, that was shown in Texas at such and such show. So it was more nationwide that they used this particular Czech film from the 50s and put it on the 60s kids shows.
It's interesting. And besides that, the Peabody too, even though Rocky and Bullwinkle always had that really sharp, very, very almost dark, but very sharp sense of humor.
Oh, yeah.
Very like subversive kind of sense of humor that all of the J Ward stuff had. But one of the things that comes up almost immediately when you look at these things is there's an educational bent to it, and Peabody's taking Sherman and saying, see, and they tried to the limit of what they had then, actually depicted history relatively okay. I mean, it was still done goofy and funny, but I remember actually reading one that I think was more in a comic. I don't know if they ever did it in the cartoon about them going to meet Eli Whitney, for instance. I mean, stuff like that. And yet there was still that educational kind of angle to it of like Peabody showing them a little bit of history. And it's interesting. We see this pop up. It's like starting with shows, quote unquote, for children a little bit.
I think even that description was kind of like maybe a way for them to get the heavier content in, because from the reruns that I used to watch of the old Peabody and Sherman and different clips, they still kind of came from a place of like, you had some of the jokes you had to already have a little bit of prior knowledge in order to really get it. And so, but it wasn't like they weren't spoon feeding you. So it was a kind of nice balance of like, okay, here's what's happening. But then also we know that you know a little bit about this, and we're going to treat you at this level rather than try and bringing it. It's kind of like, I'll show my age. It had like a Muppets vibe, where it's like, this
Yeah.
is for kids, but if you're grown up, this is for you too. So
Yeah.
it's sort of, yeah.
A lot of the Jay Ward always did that way. He had things in there that the adults would get and laugh at, and other things for the kids to get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I think the Muppets kind of continued that vibe. But yeah, I mean, Peabody and Sherman, I loved that stuff. And I always, time travel was always like one of my favorite premises in general for anything. So if anything had it, I would love it. And although Rocky and Bullwinkle was fun, I'd always be waiting for the Peabody part so we could get to the whatever the latest Peabody and Sherman bit was. And I mean those kind of things too. They've been savagely chopped to pieces in all different kind of syndicated packages. So you never, I don't remember exactly what the initial format even was about. You couldn't depend on when you were going to see them because maybe the chopped up piece you're seeing today only had Rocky and Bullwinkle in it, or you know what I mean? So it was not consistent. But I would watch those shows like stripped 5 times a week, like everything else I used to watch in reruns, and just hope for when the next Peabody and Sherman thing would be. And there's just always a highlight. Loved that.
And Taylor, you were mentioning a show from the 50s.
Yes, Captain Zero, which I just became aware of a little while back, but all the episodes are on YouTube. They're all kind of similar to what Arnold was just saying. I'm not sure if they're in the proper order, but they're all there. And they're fascinating because it's about Captain Zero, who was in the far future with his assistant companion, his buddy Jet, and they're watching a different historical event or time period, something play out. But then they always notice something's wrong, and then they have to go back to that time and sort of fix it. So they meet people like Genghis Khan and other luminaries throughout history, and it does have that educational piece to it. I think because of the era it's in, it's a little bit more. Actually, it's kind of hard to tell. That early 50s, it's very clean, very sanitized, so it kind of a kid's show. But then again, most of the stuff on TV in the 50s wasn't super edgy or gritty anyway. Even the edgy, gritty content by today's standards was all very, very clean. But it was a fun show. It was really fascinating that it was on. I think it had a pretty decent run too, because I know it started in 50 or 51-ish, but it kept going until I think right before Who debuted, which was 63, if I'm remembering correctly.
I'm looking forward to seeing this. I never heard of that until you brought it up. That's amazing. And because it sounds like, I can't believe that it seems so direct in the basic setup. It's like, I can't believe we never read any articles to say like, well, Sidney Newman was watching old reruns of Captain Zero and said, hey, we need that. I mean, it just sounds like it's an obvious connection, but.
I remember hearing about Captain Video and Captain.
Oh yeah, Captain Video.
And there was another Captain, but like I didn't remember hearing about Captain Zero. I'll have to look that one up too.
Yes,
yeah.
And it's Zero without the E, just capital Z and then RO. Okay. Captain Zero. But the episodes are on the YouTubes, and it's a lot of. It's very of its time, kind of like the old classic Who. Like the special effects are not groundbreaking. And so the suspension of disbelief is more about just enjoying the stories as opposed to sort of like being wowed by the visuals.
That's cool.
And so after that, we're just going to keep on moving forward to Time Tunnel, which is another classic episodes series.
Now that's part, not nearly as much a part of my childhood as some of Irwin Allen's other shows, but still definitely one that's, I mean, that's in the sweet spot of like, if you're a certain age too. Yes. So I'm 49, so.
Anyway. Youngster.
So, but like growing up in the 70s, I was still also watching nothing but 60s television because everything was in rerun. So from my childhood, it explains everything I loved because it was Star Trek and Batman and the Monkees and all these 60s shows, Lost in Space. And then via Lost in Space, discovered all of Irwin Allen's other stuff, including the Time Tunnel, which didn't crop up quite as much, mainly because it ran so short. It was harder for them to keep that like going in
about a season.
Yeah, but it was great. It had the same basic production values as all Lost in Space stuff, including a lot of the same props. It had just this instant recognition, beautiful imagery of that huge vortex they're stepping into, the static thing that they have set up there. It's a great idea. And then in many ways, it's also the precursor for a lot of the things we love today from different eras, because Tony and Doug, like Sam and Quantum Leap, and like many others, they're lost in time. They can't get back. And there's always the thing of cutting back to the present, right? With the operation and where are they now? Well, we know where they are, but we can't. And if I remember correctly, either originally intended or done in syndication, if I remember correctly, they actually ended the final episode with them winding back onto the deck of the Titanic, which was in the first episode, implying that they're stuck in a time loop.
Yeah.
So there's kind
they
of a
did go to the far
disturbing
future.
Yeah. So it's like it was a really fun show. And I mean, it's like a lot of the 60s shows. If you like a lot of 60s television, same level of production value and fun. And it was great.
And
Little
also
more
at the same time period as the Time Tunnel, you also had It's About Time, which is more of a comedy, where you had astronauts traveling back in time to the Stone Age. And then the second season, they went forward in time. They brought the cavemen forward. It was more played for laughs than anything else.
Yeah, like sitcom version of time travel.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think my first exposure to that was I have this book that's one of my definitive childhood books that taught me everything about the TV I either already loved or wanted to know about. It's called Fantastic Television. And it was basically a catalog. And I think it has one picture of Imogene Coca and what we just found, Joey Ross, we just found out is the other. I think it has one picture of them as the cavemen, the cave people in it. And I didn't see the show for years, but I saw that picture in the book and I was like, oh, I want to see that. That looks like fun.
It was a catchy theme song too.
Yeah, that's right.
And let's go to the next show, which is Voyagers, which is from the 80s. Once
We
again,
jumped over a few shows though.
oh, which ones do you want to bring up?
Well, Dark Shadows, although it wasn't basically a soap opera about vampires, it had at least 4 timelines where they basically traveled back in time, one through astral projection. And that was the only, my younger sister loved it as a soap opera. I was there for the time travel parts. So when Barnabas Collins travels back in time, I'm there finding out how people became ghosts and things like that.
Notice any distinctions? A question for everyone between I don't want to say foreign, but British, because that's really my experience. So British time travel premises and programs versus their American counterparts.
Mm-hmm.
It felt like, and this is just my own take, but I'm really curious what you think. With British shows or English shows, they always seem to have more of a symbolic kind of bend to them. When you're watching a time travel show, whether it's Doctor Who or any of the other programs, Sapphire and Steel, they weren't really about time travel per se, but it was sort of they had a bigger message either blatantly or more subtly. Whereas American shows felt again, just my 2 cents, it was definitely all right, we're in time because now we need to use our cowboy props that we have laying around the studio, or we've got they were shooting an old corset buster, so let's take them back to romantic times and find out about what was his name in Dark Shadows, the main vampire?
Barnabas Collins.
Barnabas. Let's see what old Barney was up to back before he got bitten, and because we have all these extras. But I'm just curious, what your thoughts are, the distinction, or maybe I'm way off and there wasn't a distinction. I'm just missing the point.
I think you're right on target about quite a bit of that, particularly in terms of shows like Time Tunnel. I mean, look, even in times where maybe you could argue television wasn't necessarily as self-aware, or the people working on a given show weren't trying to make any big statement and just trying to churn out entertainment for a paycheck or whatever it is. I mean, surely there's meaning that's going to come in no matter what. But when it comes to a show like Time Tunnel, for instance, because the kind of person Irwin Allen was a producer who could try to do as much as he could with a little. That was look, I'm on the lot. They're, like you said, they're already doing a cowboy show over there. They're doing 40 of those. There's a World War II thing happening right now. I can grab that thing and do an episode and do it. So yeah, absolutely. It's a great, ultimately time travel is a great premise for saving money if you're in a studio system, because you have access to a lot of stuff. And the thing is, that's how Doctor Who worked too. So it's Also true over there. You got BBC are great at period dramas.
Mhm.
So, throw them back into the past and put everybody in an outfit that we already have. And that's fine. Then the question becomes, like you're saying about, you can do so much with storytelling based in time travel, and specifically also in storytelling that goes backwards into history.
Mhm.
The question then becomes the level of creativity and investment of the people telling the story. And in some cases, it's just not there. But I'm sure for a lot of people, though, it was a quick choice because of the excuse of we could do this a lot easier
Mhm.
than like a full-fledged science fiction show, because we can just use what we have.
Or they used a book that already existed, like it was either ITV or BBC, Time Slip, where you had kids traveling to the far future. And it was more of an environmental thing. So it was more about global warming. So they traveled to the far future where the whole world is icy, and then they also traveled back. It's like, so it was more based on the book series, though.
Hmm.
And then, of course, like you mentioned, Sapphire and Steel.
Now, Alex was also heading us toward Voyagers,
Yeah.
which is one of the ones I remember from the
Mhm.
80s. And I'd argue it's one of the ones where in the 80s you start to see maybe a little more. I mean, it was still a show aimed largely at a younger audience, but maybe occasionally you'd start to see a bit more self-awareness of storytelling. I mean, basically, you still just got like two white guys traveling through history. You're not going to get much accomplished with this show, but it had a cute idea, and there was the nice hook with the little device, and I feel like, maybe there's like some very minor progress happening if you're moving forward in the chronology of all this when you get to that.
I would broadly agree with that. For myself, with Quantum Leap is sort of a key point. We're going to jump off to another one, but sort of everything before Quantum Leap, it was all not, if not children's show, at least then family oriented. If it's family oriented, then hey, a little history, so it's at least educational. I mean, we all can remember that Doctor Who was sort of sold on the premise that we'll do half the episodes on science and half the episodes on education, and this will be wonderful for the children. And yeah, cheap props. And there was a formula. You would go back, there would be sort of a crisis where history would change for the worse, and the heroes would solve the problem, and everything would be right as rain. And very episodic, not a lot of depth, not a lot of self-consciousness. And I know that when I was growing up, I just ate that stuff up.
Yeah, sure. And I agree with you. I think we'll look back now and realize more and more Quantum Leap really is a turning point in a lot of ways, at least narrowly within this kind of show. Because really the time travel was not, I mean, in a sense, it got a little more science fiction-y as it went on. I really enjoyed the show more the more it got into the mythology of it. But really, ultimately, the show is just a human interest drama. And it's like we could tell all kind of great personal stories. It's just the gimmick of insert our guy into that thing. But the level of, I mean, I think about now, again, by today's standards, and it's simplistic. There's still some very big issues with the show, gender-wise, racially, all sorts of things there. And yet,
Also, was in the chimp at one point too.
What?
He was also in the chimp one time too.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what I was going to say. It's like, even given the limitations of the time, they really tried. Like, they did the episode where he's in The Pregnant Woman. They did many episodes that were gender flipping, so that Sam was a woman. There were ones where they dealt with racial issues, and by today's standards, you could probably look back and say these are really, they're not really going too deeply in it. But still, it was a good show for the time. It really had its heart in the right place, and some of them are still so memorable for really trying to do something different on network television. Network television show. They really tried to do some stuff that was, groundbreaking for that kind of storytelling. And they used the time travel hook as a cool way to get into it. And And yeah, it stands the test of time, at least in that sense. I feel like there have been missed opportunities. There have been talks in recent years how they were going to try to do something new with it, and all that kind of fell through. And it's a shame, because that's a show that could definitely be the sort of soft reboot relaunch that we're seeing so much now pretty easily. And you know that he'd come back, to do it again. But
I would say it doesn't even have to be a soft reboot. The final episode was deliberately written because they didn't know if the show was going to be renewed or not.
Oh, I mean in the sense that I would say you keep it in the continuity of the story. Don't start over again. Like, for instance, the plan they'd had a few years ago was Sci-Fi Channel was developing, bringing it back, where they were going to have him still missing. And the premise was going to be his daughter was now looking for him through time. But that was just an excuse to get the story started again. And now she was going to be leaping, and you knew that what that meant was there'd be like an end of season special appearance by him where she'd find him somewhere or something and he'd be lost again. But that was the plan. I think Dean Stockwell not being so well threw a lot of that off too. But anyway, I mean, it's a great premise. And possibly one of the best time travel shows ever done, but really time travel in a sense is also not that important to it. It's really character drama and good stuff.
Like, why was so I'm 40. So that started, if I'm remembering correctly, and I might not be, but someone can check the dates on the Wikipedias or whatever. But I think I was like 9 years old when it started.
It was late 80s, I think.
89 was when it
89. Okay, so yeah, I was 9 years old when it started. I remember it was part of my rebellion because I was one of those like knucklehead Trekkies that when TNG came out, this is not my Star Trek.
Yeah.
Like, it was obviously I've come around, but that was just back then. So I was looking for anything else.
Behind you,
yeah, a little bit, just a smidge. But I remember watching it and like it didn't register at the time as sci-fi to me. It wasn't until I want to say like it was on DVD or VHS later when I got to like high school, even college, looking back at it, like, oh yeah, like, this is kind of a sci-fi show. But it was also like, it was prime time, like you mentioned, network television.
Yeah.
It won a Golden Globe, if I'm remembering, won a bunch of Emmys, or it won a bunch of awards. It was sort of like, this is not what sci-fi TV is supposed to be in the 80s, early 90s. This is not what we do. Like, we're syndicated on the weekends, or we're on cable shows. Like, how, like, where was that? How did that come together? Because I don't think there's really been a Quantum Leap-esque program, even though network TV is not really where it was. But even if we go back, say, 15 years before streaming took over, like the 2000s and the heritage or golden age of TV, sci-fi wasn't really that. It was kind of like I was mentioning, it was still like this genre entertainment platform. It was on the cable shows. You were watching an HBO because they had sci-fi stuff. You were watching the Sci-Fi Network because they had sci-fi stuff, or one of the syndicated. Like, how did that break?
No, the days before cable channels, there was a lot of shows.
The main thing about Quantum Leap, to keep it short about just that, is you had Bellisario. Don Bellisario was the creator and the producer. And this was a guy that had cut his teeth on a lot of much more typical, basic, real-world, present-day television, like Magnum PI and Airwolf and all this kind of. It's like Quantum Leap kind of came in stealth. Like, his idea was, yes, it's time travel, but we're kind of hiding that part from you most of the time. Just watch the guy having an adventure in another era, and don't worry about. And that's why, as a sci-fi fan, I loved where the more the show got comfortable with itself, and they knew the network was going to be okay, they amped it up a little bit. Like, it was a few years before they'd ever even show us the future, which in the show was 1999. And then we started going up to the future once in a while, where Al would actually be in the room with the person that Sam had swapped with, so they could talk to them and get some more information. But they didn't do that much because they didn't want to really do it. And there was one I loved where he swapped, I think, with a serial killer, and the guy escaped into 1999 and they had to go get him. And it's like, there were occasionally more sci-fi things. There was the Evil Leaper. There was an episode that basically said the devil existed. But it was kind of one of those things where they'd save that for once in a while because they knew we're dealing with a network show. They want just drama. They don't want a lot of fancy sci-fi stuff. And the gems were those moments where Quantum Leap really just let itself be crazy. That final episode is nuts. And really...
Yeah, just on that point, Quantum Leap is horrible science fiction. The science is not consistent.
Well,
Sam could do some things sometimes in some episodes because of the plot, but not do the same thing, and other things happen because of the plot.
well,
The
yeah.
science
I mean, they
is
never even,
wildly inconsistent.
yeah, they were never even consistent in the first couple seasons about whether he was physically there or not.
Mhm.
Like if you watch the early seasons of the show, they make it very clear in certain plot moments that he is like inhabiting the body.
Yeah.
But later on, they decided to nail it down for certain that he's physically transposing with the other person, and that you're only seeing them as the other person because it's the aura they've left behind when he swapped. So yeah, I mean, Alex, like even in the show itself, they didn't know what the hell they were doing for most of
No,
it.
it's enjoyable science fiction.
Oh yeah, sure.
Not good science fiction.
Yeah, it's not. Don't go to Quantum Leap if you want to know about physics. That's what it is.
And same thing with Time Cop, which was only one season back in 1997.
Oh my God, I
Based on
forgot
the
they did a
movie.
TV show. Time
Is
Cop.
that the is that the TV adaptation of the movie?
Yep. Mhm.
Okay.
Was it like a sequel to the movie, or did it redo the plot of the movie again? Kind of.
I never saw the movie, so
Okay.
I just saw the TV show.
Okay. I saw the movie, and that was kind of fun for the time. But boy, I forgot there was a TV show.
I know I watched that entire series because it's only the one season. I remember nothing about it. Like it was that good.
I tell you
Basically,
something
he
right
has
now.
a partner, and she's basically more at the office. It's like, yeah.
I tell you, in 2020, the title "Time Cop" now sounds like a joke title for a fake show that you would refer to in another show. I'm sorry, I have to shoot another episode of Time Cop. I'll be right back. It's like,
So I know the movie was a Jean-Claude Van Damme
yeah,
standard martial
yeah.
action picks. Did the TV show elevate it from that premise, or
We had Jack Logan. That's about all I know about it. Don't remember much about it.
I'm actually
I've
going to
got the VHS tape somewhere, but it's like I haven't watched that in a while.
By the way, all of this, I'm just looking it up just so that we can provide a little information here. Is it all goes back to a Dark Horse comic originally. So it's basically independent of the movie with all new characters and cast and no continuation of plot. And they shot 13 episodes and only aired 9. So it didn't do too well. I will say one thing, by the way. I love the fact that just looking at the Wikipedia page for this, it has like 3 sentences. It's not a show that has a lot of information on it, but I like that the guest star list says H.G. Wells and Adolf Hitler. It's like, well, you're doing a time travel show. I mean, that's another thing. I think almost every show we can talk about, H.G. Wells probably pops up at some point.
Mhm.
And I mean,
House 13 and
yeah. Of course, there was
Library.
also like H.G. Wells and Lois and Clark, and H.G. Wells does a lot of work.
Yeah.
So yeah, gets around.
Well, he's a time traveler, so.
Yeah, he's busy.
And now just to get further afield from the classic low budget educational one, Lost. Is that a time travel TV series? What are your thoughts?
I'd say yes. I mean, it's not one like if you want to hold yourself to some kind of standard, like a time travel show should be a show where the premise is your characters travel every week to a different place, then no. But I don't think that's worth being that restrictive about. And Lost made it very clear that doesn't the island move through time at some point throughout the show? Like the whole island actually moves. There's time travel in that, so it counts. I never stuck with the show all the way to the end though, so
No. Yeah, I tapped out after the smoke monster.
I count myself lucky. I kind of decided I'm
I
done.
never saw it, so.
Yeah, but yeah, it's a time travel show. It's also really weird. I mean, it's Lost is one of those shows that exists like on a variety of different categories because it's such a format breaking, bizarre experiment in storytelling. And some would say successful. There are plenty of people that still love it to this day and revisit it over and over again. So
I will say this is one of the few TV shows which are clever, in the sense that they're trying to use time travel as a paradox and explaining of things going on, and you have weird time effects. Usually, this is limited to higher thought level novels or movies. Lost, I think, actually did that successfully until the last season where things sort of fell apart.
That happens a lot with these kind of things. Yeah, so like more of a high concept kind of approach. Yeah, I think so. I mean, look, that show, for better or worse, no matter what anybody thinks about it, it captured everybody's attention, and particularly already at a time where we were very much into an internet age, for a show like that to get so many people so invested and wondering what's going to happen next, and be fascinated with the unfolding mythology. That's quite an accomplishment. I mean, I don't think it certainly is one of the shows that also you can argue it didn't stick the landing. Some people disagree and think it did. But it was very, very, like you say, clever. It tries to be clever, sometimes maybe too clever for its own good, but also in a way to try to really do something different and exciting in storytelling. So, I can't fault anybody for being fascinated by it. It didn't hook me, but it hooked a lot of people.
I think to your point, you'd mentioned about Quantum Leap, how like the sci-fi elements were kind of slipped in or hand waved, and really the focus somewhere else. That's what I felt like with Lost. Was with the first 3 seasons before I tapped out. The first season I thought was like a gritty, hardcore Gilligan's Island, and I think that's kind of how they played, especially the pilot. Like the pilot, or the first 2 episodes or so, it really was almost more of like this like situation drama. Catastrophe film, great effects, and it's like, all right, now we have these people on the island, and then like, how are they going to survive? And then there's like things happening on the island, but they're all still grounded in sort of like a plausible scenario. But then as things went on, they were able to use that to kind of add other stuff. But even when they're adding the smoke monster or that weird bunker where they had to keep resetting the numbers, I wasn't a huge fan of like little things like that. All these other elements, it was like, oh, okay. Even like playing with predestination and things like that early on, when they go back with someone's story and see how they kind of like they're all connected. And it felt like we're gonna use the sci-fi label, but really we're gonna do different types of stories. So I would argue the first season is more of a survivalist situation drama. The second season was more of a almost like an X-Files-y sort of mystery, whatever you put that genre. Not really occult, like supernatural, or you didn't really know what's happening. Third season was almost like old school, like procedural, because there's always some problem. And then the bad guy with the pretty chin, who like they didn't have razors, but they all kept the perfect amount of stubble. That guy, it's like everyone's like undermining the others. It's all these groups and warring factions, so it's sort of like 24, but like no indoor plumbing kind of thing happening. So it's like they're almost like jumping through different genres, but just keeping that through line. So I think that maybe that's why like the general viewing audience was able to grow as much as it was, because it was, at least for me, those first couple of seasons, there's something for everyone. It was like, oh, with the romance, because here we have Evangeline Lilly and the pretty guy from Party of Five. They're, will they, won't they? But then here's a stubble guy, he comes in and stuff like that. It's so there's a soap opera element, but then it's also like, well, there's this mysterious bunker we found, and we have to keep resetting the numbers. So there's like kind of whodunit sci-fi thing, and then there's a smoke monster. So there's also this supernatural part.
I got to tell you though, I lost interest after I think it was the 8 or 9 episodes. But if you had been there then to explain the show to me the way you're explaining now, I would have stuck with it and watched the whole thing. You're selling the show on a level that's so much better than what I thought.
Oh, wow. And I tapped out. I could.
I know, but you captured it, man. And don't get me started on grooming on television. Like I spent years having to pay attention to The Walking Dead. It's amazing how well everybody remains perfectly coiffed, and hair removal is still a very ongoing. It's a post-apocalypse people, but yeah, I mean, ultimately, and the thing is, sort of what you're touching in the sense that we talked about, like Quantum Leap, how very often science fiction is treated like something they're embarrassed by, like they want to leverage it, but they want to leverage it in a way that they can also disassociate themselves from it and say, yes, but we're not really a science fiction show because we're on the network, we're a drama. And as a science fiction fan, as all of us being science fiction fans, we know that could be really grating. And yet also, I think Lost was on the cusp of a time where they saw value in that. I might be misremembering, but it seems to me they leaned into that a little more overtly than a lot of network shows would. And I mean, let's face it, you're dealing with smoke monsters and time travel and all that. You can't really deny it, for too long. But I think they owned it a little better than a lot of shows that try to say we're not really that, and still hope that sci-fi fans will tune in. So yeah, it tried. It's a little something for everybody in that. I mean, ultimately, it's a show that probably went on 2 or 3 years too long for the story that they were telling.
The
That's usually the
producers,
problem.
the producers only wanted it 3-4 years,
There you go.
and networks had them stretch it out.
Yeah, there you go. That's usually the problem. X-Files too, the same thing. They made them go too long.
Well, X-Files, they just didn't have the, I don't know. X-Files definitely doesn't count as a time travel show, but I will say
Oh,
I think it's slightly different in that case. That could be a whole other panel.
We'll do an X-Files panel.
Yeah.
Well, moving forward, what's the next show we want to talk about?
Well, let's see. We're really coming up to the present. I know there was a whole spate of shows in the 2000s that dealt with time in different ways. I think Kathryn, you mentioned a couple others from like more present, but also I'm thinking about a show like Flash Forward, for instance. You remember that?
Yes.
Which is not strictly time. I guess the other thing is like how we define our terms. Like there are shows that play, like Alex is saying, play like with cleverly with time as a way of constructing a story where you don't necessarily have characters physically or otherwise transposing from one period to another, but it did deal with time in a narrative sense. It's a little bit different maybe.
Mhm.
But then I think we were talking before we got started about some shows like Timeless. I think did someone mention Timeless?
Yeah, I mean, Timeless was definitely a pure time travel show. I mean, the whole premise was that they had developed a time machine, and then a rogue agent in the lab where they developed the machine stole one and was hiding throughout time to try and reset things in the past so they would affect the future. And so they assembled a team to take the backup time machine and go chase him down and stop. And I mean, that was definitely nothing subtle about Timeless, but it was really well done, especially because it was modern or contemporary. So they're kind of building off of all the shows and films and stories that had come before, with not really a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, but there's definitely like a self-awareness that I think helped with their story writing, especially in terms of things like race and gender and how they've changed throughout history, depending on the country and the culture. They didn't shy away from that. Even like sort of like later era Doctor Who, like there's a, is it Thin Ice or Deep Breath? There's a 12th Doctor and Pearl Mackie episode. When
Nice.
Yes, they go back and she's like, oh, like they comment on like London back in the Victorian era is actually pretty diverse because it was a big shipping town. So there are all these little like nods, but it wasn't so much of like, that wasn't a big plot point. It was sort of mentioned, they acknowledge it, and then they kept going. Whereas Timeless definitely had some, they played with it a bit much, and they weren't as historically accurate. They were more sort of like, because I'm guessing producers are probably like around our ages ish in like the 40s and 50s, so they had the same public school educations, and so things like, oh well, that's not exactly what happened with the Hindenburg, but that's what we were taught, so it's fair. It's kind of all right, that plays. So definitely not a lot of educational aspects like its predecessors.
I don't know why, but when you started talking about Timeless, I suddenly remembered I had completely forgotten about this. And I want to see if anybody else remembers. Do you remember the show 7 Days? Now this fits perfectly within our topic. This was a show that ran for 3 seasons. It was on UPN 98 to 2001, and I completely forgot about it. And he's a government agent. He works for like a secret branch of the government. They have a device. They can only send him back 7 days. Any one time they do it. So basically it's like it is just good for averting some kind of catastrophe or disaster. Like most of the stories would be like, oh, a terrorist has set a bomb and just blown up the Washington Monument or something. They send him back 7 days. He can figure out what's happening. He's got the week to work on everything. And it was not a bad show as far as like your typical, like most American television for the past 50 years. It basically just winds up being a procedural, but it was not that bad. And it was interesting because it decided to do something so limited and so specific and find a way to use it. And I forgot about that completely. That's probably one of the shortest duration time travel shows you can find for something that focused.
That sounds really good.
But yeah, 7 days, and ran for 66 episodes, which no one now remembers. But anyway,
Oh, that's yeah.
maybe he went back and erased the show eventually. But yeah, I forgot about that one.
There
It's
were
like,
a lot of shows like that.
yeah,
That era
yeah.
where they would throw stuff out there. Maybe because, like you said, you mentioned like the internet era was kind of starting, so they thought they could kind of maybe build a niche audience enough, and then found out like, no, we still need to get sponsor money, so things would kind of pop up.
They're
Like
starting up cable networks like UPN and CW were just starting up.
Yeah.
So they were throwing these shows out.
Yeah, that's right. It's all these different periods of time too. It's kind of interesting if you look back. It's these periods of time where you get different steps along the way in the development of television as a business
Mhm.
that allows the opportunity to do something different. And like there are several steps we've already talked about, some of them either before we recorded or while we're recording, like things like the syndication era of the late 80s, early 90s, where so much stuff was being churned out purely for syndication.
Mhm.
Like Paramount thought they were going to start a network back then. They didn't, but a lot of stuff got packaged to just be on the weekends, like Next Generation kind of stuff. And then UPN, WB, all these other enterprises that were trying to start up a network and think, all right, let's try something different. Let's do something clever. And but yeah, and I mean now, I mean my God, streaming services is I think another great example of that kind of thing happening, where you get all these exclusive shows, whether to Hulu or Amazon or whatever. And yeah, and unfortunately, I guess what that also means is a lot of these shows get lost, a different kind of lost, but lost to history because it's just so much stuff. And
You're
time
talking
travel.
about a good lost show, Terminator, the Sarah Connor Chronicles.
I love the original movies. I never saw a minute of that show, but I know that everybody I've ever talked to about it said it was great and they really liked the show.
Well, it helps that Sarah Connor was played by Cersei of Game of Thrones.
Mm.
And the Terminator was Summer Glau. Glau, am I saying that right? Glau.
Glau, yeah, she was one of the two main Terminators.
Yeah.
It was just really well done. It was contemporary science fiction done right. And season 2 ended on a very nice cliffhanger, implying they were going to go with the multiple worlds theory of time travel. And then that was it. So
yeah, I never saw it, but it's like that's one of those ones that really captured a lot of people. It had a lot to like of baggage and history with that whole movie franchise, but that show apparently really did a lot of things right for a lot of people, and that probably should be on, like, I don't know, the people that make like top 10, top 20 lists of time travel shows. That's going to turn up.
I mean,
really like that one.
That was the best sequel in the Terminator franchise, is the Sarah Connor Chronicles.
Yeah, you think so?
I think like Terminator was good. T2 was okay. Because I think when you go back and watch it, it is more for the visuals than the story.
T2 doesn't age all that well, no, in a lot of respects.
But the Sarah Connor Chronicles I think the premise of Terminator lends itself to the long form storytelling of television better than the short or comparatively short form of motion pictures. Like if you're working with 90 minutes to maybe 2.5 hours, you really do have to cram a lot in there, especially with the mythos is kind of out there as the Terminator world. But with Sarah Connor Chronicles, they took time, you gave a damn about the characters. Everyone is acting like it mattered. It was really well done. Whereas,
give that a shot sometime.
Yeah, the Terminator films are definitely, especially the last handful, is like, okay, it looks like Arnold wants a new summer house or something, or
Yeah, well. Yeah.
But speaking of forgotten ones, because that's the same era, there's a great show called Continuum, which popped up on Netflix. Is where I found it, but I think it came out in like 2011 originally, or 2012-ish. Only on for like maybe 2-3 seasons. It starred Rachel. She was in the Clueless TV adaptation, but she basically plays this sort of cop from, I think, a century in the future, like maybe it's like 2100 or 2080. And then she's chasing these like terrorists in the future, but the terrorists have a time machine device and jump back to present day Vancouver in Canada. And so she gets sent back, and then she starts working with this teenage computer genius whiz kid who turns out he's going to end up being someone very important in the future, but she's trying not to tell him that. And then the terrorists are actually trying to take down the corporations that end up being like bad guys in the future. So you're not really rooting for her to find them, but you're also not rooting for them because they are terrorists. And it was a really fun show. It was really good. And it just kind of, Netflix had, I think it had like 2 or 3 seasons, and then it vanished from Netflix, and I haven't seen it since. Like, it hasn't popped up. I think it was because it was a Canadian show. And I don't know if the distribution's different with those, like getting stuff over.
Yeah.
But that was a really fun, that was a well done show. That was very hardcore sci-fi. Even though time travel was just the kickoff event, they didn't travel a lot of time through time like during it, but there were a lot of flashes back to her in her present time in like 2080 or whatever it was, and her present time in Vancouver in the mid-aughts. That was a fun one. That was really good.
By the way, in terms of ones that are kind of forgotten, although I'm sure that for everyone we think is forgotten, it's like somebody out there remembers it. There's another one that when I was thinking of 7 Days, I also remembered one. I never followed it, but I remember it existed. It only ran 1 season. It was called Journeyman, and it was in the early 2000s, and it was about a reporter that from San Francisco who travels through time, and was sort of like a romantic drama, but it only lasted 13 episodes. But they were really pushing that quite a bit at the time, and it just, like a lot of things, it just doesn't go anywhere. But it's like there's a lot more of this stuff than a lot of the ones we all remember. It's just such a, for all the reasons we already talked about, it's like just such a potent premise for coming up with a new show. There's so many ways you can take advantage of that, and I'm sure we're forgetting like the 1,000 others that are. I was just poking around because I knew there were ones I used to watch that I don't remember anymore, and that was one. 12 Monkeys also. They did the TV version of 12 Monkeys. Yeah.
Well, the first season is mostly like a retread of the film.
Yeah.
Which is not bad. It's a lot of fun because they get to, again, use the long form storytelling format of television. They can dive a little deeper, but
yeah, you consider that premise initially ran, what was it, just like 10, 15 minutes, the original La Jetée. It's just like in and out, but let's make a show out of it. Okay. I know one of you mentioned Legends of Tomorrow that you wanted to talk about.
That would be me. Not educational, not thought-provoking.
Every time they go back in time to fix something, they make it worse.
If you're going to watch it, skip the first season. The first season, they're still trying to figure out where everything is. But yes, seasons 2 through 5 are just absolutely delightfully bonkers.
We'll have to watch that one because that's Arthur Darvill, right? It's the lead. Or one
during
of the
season 1, where they're still taking things a little seriously, but he doesn't really work, and so they dump him and the seriousness of it, and just go completely bonkers. When they go back in time, they make things worse. But it's dancing demons, 60-foot tall, 80s.
Yeah. I did see the recent one where they got it transposed into various TV shows.
Yeah, no, I'm Bebo. He's a 60-foot tall, sort of 80s, 80s toys, just going back and forth. Gets possessed by a demon, comes up to 80 feet, and just you've got Marie Antoinette just doing dancing and just it's low grade comedy fun. They're using time travel as an excuse to do funny things. They're using science fiction as an excuse to do hilarious things. There's a little bit of cleverness, but it's just a joy.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with clever and funny things. That works.
We'll definitely check it out.
Clever, stupid, not clever.
I never got into it either, but doesn't Heroes have some time travel stuff in it also? I mean, maybe not as a regular recurring premise, but I think they have characters that move. They see in the future that something's going to happen, right? And that's
because Hero, right?
Hero, yes.
Yeah. That's his superpower, is the sort of right.
Actually, move in time.
Yeah.
He gets stuck in feudal Japan for a little while.
As you do, you know.
But it seems like that period between Quantum Leap and Lost, right? So we had the first kind of big cultural saturation moment where it's like we got a time travel show that mass appeal, and then Lost was kind of like the next wave. But in between, a few times I tried it, but I don't know if this counts. But so it reminds me, there's a you said completely bonkers. There's a show, and I forget the actor's name, but he's on Friday Night Lights now. It was called Early Edition.
Oh, yeah.
I was just
Do you
thinking about
do you remember that? Where he got
Yeah.
tomorrow's newspaper today.
Yeah.
And based on that, he would go like, I mean, it was a procedural.
Yeah. Again.
But the premise
Like, yeah.
was so. And I remember
Not
watching
quite time
that.
travel, but like
Right.
the idea of
Oh, the
seeing
newspaper
the
travel
future
back in
sort of,
time.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that. That was a pretty good show. I mean, it was, silly idea.
Jason
Yeah.
Chicago, so it's like, yeah, he's got those. Oh, yeah, Chicago.
And also for all the shows that disappoint you, like, Terminator, unfortunately, and sci-fi seems to be a show that often suffers more than anyone else from like the cliffhanger ending or the unfinished ending. Quantum Leap being a great example too. Early Edition actually had a definitive ending, and he passes the newspaper on to a girl who is going to get the paper now. Yeah, and it's like, so it was a cute idea. It's just an excuse for
Oh yeah.
character drama.
It could work as a reboot. They would just have to make it a period piece. I think that would make
Yeah.
it more.
Yeah,
have a
that's
lot more
right.
poignancy. Like if they made it like
Unless he gets text alerts on his phone.
right, it's just like, or emails like, oh, you put the date in wrong. But if it was like some cub reporter and she's like just got her first job at the big city newspaper,
Yeah.
but she keeps getting a print of tomorrow's paper and it's like 1952, and like she's trying to go solve crimes before they happen, the day before they happen.
Let's get the pitch
What
to
was
somebody.
interesting was that for the Hugo Awards this year, they had the retro Hugos. They had a film from the 1940s that was the early premise for the early edition, where you had a reporter who was getting the early editions in the paper, and he started peering at where that was going to happen so that he could then write up the story. So he was benefiting from these early papers. He wasn't really trying to stop anything.
So just to sort of go back a little bit and just talking about television and talking about like Heroes and Lost, I think that's also like a critical point in how television changed, because before then it was all episodic. With Heroes and Lost, all of a sudden more people are time shifting. They're now buying the seasons on DVD. They're looking at the internet and trying to do stuff. And unfortunately, these shows have to crank out 20 episodes a year?
Yeah, sometimes more. Yeah.
Yeah. Which just meant that they were sort of building an airplane while it was in mid-flight.
Yeah.
And like the first season of Heroes worked. Second season didn't, just because they had just exhausted all the plot points in the first one. Lost was sort of the same thing, trying to cram 7 years worth of narrative in when they could only support it 4. So just thing got thin. And now we're sort of back to sort of, as you're saying, premier streaming television, Taylor, with people actually. It's like, when will the next? Oh, why am I blanking out on the cartoon show, which takes forever and ever to come out with the next one, with Morty in it?
Oh,
Rick and Morty.
Rick and Morty, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Takes forever for the next episode to come out. It's being cohesive.
So I guess your idea is like, what's the next like general format? Well, when you think about the shift from episodic to serial, I mean, obviously you'll find examples of all this stuff in any era. Like, it's not pure. Like there were serialized storytelling in television when it first started, but episodic definitely wound up being the business model that worked, because it was the way they knew they could sell a show into syndication and not have anybody worry about what order they were in. So it behooved them to keep things separate. And then that started shifting. And really, you could probably credit Buffy as one of the shows that really started creating the notion of the expectation of an arc that would conclude at the end of a season.
Didn't Babylon 5 come out before then?
What was that?
Didn't
Babylon 5, yes,
come out before then?
absolutely. Yeah. Babylon 5,
and
and then
DS9
Heroes and
before
Lost
then.
kind of run with it. Yeah. And now we have a very different set of factors because on the one hand, you got streaming, and Netflix started the thing where you dump an entire season of a show, which really, when you watch these shows, they're really like 8-10 hour movies, that they've put into chunks. It's a different kind of approach. And then you also have what Disney Plus and the others have started doing, which is realizing that you lose a lot from a corporate point of view, and I would argue from an experiential point of view too, when you dump it all at once, because although that's nice, and some people like that because you can watch at your own pace, you also lose the social aspect of it. People won't be talking about your show for the next 10 weeks. Everybody's done with it within the first few days. There are people, I remember like Daredevil was dropping on Netflix. By the next morning of the 3 a.m. that dropped, everybody had already seen the whole thing and was done with it. And meanwhile, Disney Plus and the others realize, yes, but if we continue to put things out week by week, we get all those hits where people keep doing recaps and talking about it. So I think what we're seeing now is we're in the middle of a major shift in how media is consumed. There is no one answer. And to a certain extent, everybody's trying everything right now. I personally like the idea of getting things doled out because I think that helps you to share the experience with people over a longer period of time. But there's equally people who love dumping a whole season and consuming it the way they want. And I think we're getting to a point where a little of everything is happening. I don't know if any one thing is going to win, but right now it seems like it's a little of everything.
I think episodic is almost done for, except I'll just say that. I'll probably be wrong, and we can archive this and we can look back. But I think episodic has been replaced by anthology a lot because of the success of certain shows like Black Mirror, Room 104, the reboot of Twilight Zone that launched at CBS All Access, like the anthology, and there's dozens of others. There's Lore, there's even American Horror Story. You could argue is an anthology, even though it does that on a season-wide arc instead of episode to episode.
Doesn't True Detective do that too?
Right, True Detective.
Yeah.
So I think episodic is no longer the 23 to 48 minutes, but now it's like it's an anthology. So you're actually getting a complete story, and it's more the brand of the show rather than the characters or the plots, the settings, etc. But I think in terms of serialized television, I think that the dump to me, because I'm one of those who likes the big dump, even though I don't do the big binges, I'll watch 1 or 2 episodes at a time. I like not having to wait and just having it there. And a lot of the shows that I got into, because I think without outing myself too much, I might be the youngest one on the panel right now. But a lot of the shows I'm into, like they came and went before I was born. So then when I go back and watch the whole thing, I'm like, oh, this is great. But then that builds the connection with other fans. And I realize that's slightly different. Like me going back and saying, you know what, I never did get to see like the Sixth Doctor. I watched it, but I really should devour that. I can go back. But then I talked to the Whovians. They're like, oh, yeah, dude, like this is awesome. Like Colin Baker is definitely underrated and this and that. So there's that connection. I think that sort of like, did you see it water cooler vibe they used to throw around back in the day, like what you'd be talking about the next day, like who shot JR and that kind of stuff. Yeah. I think that just as a society is dead because of the internet, because even when they don't drop it, there's always a billion like fan theories that are all over the internets and social medias and everyone's. So you can't even with movies, when they're like, oh, I hear Marvel's going to release such and such in 2024 and we think this is what's going to happen. It's like, what? Like this is half a decade and you're already making predictions. So I think that the viewership has changed.
Yeah, I agree.
You're right. Adapted to, like, not for better or worse. I think it's still there, that excitement. I just think it's not so much of like, oh, did you see what happened? And more about just general excitement for the content and stories.
I know we're running low on time, but I want to just to add to what Taylor's saying, because it's the one other aspect of that that's true is I think the general window of time to actually comment on anything has also shrunk so much because of the internet. You get that thing now where every damn time a movie or TV show comes out, literally within like 12 to 24 hours of the release, you'll get all those articles on the internet. So let's talk about that ending. And it's like, could you give us a minute to see the thing? And so, I mean, in a sense, that drives all of this. So yeah, I think you're right. And the dump of everything works well with that because they figure, all right, you've seen it, you've got it now, so that's on you. and then we'll talk about it.
Okay, well, we're sort of coming to the end, so let's just end with everyone saying their favorite time travel show, and then we'll bid everyone adieu. So I'll kick off, and I will say Quantum Leap, just because it was from my childhood, and hey, not the greatest science fiction, but a very good drama.
And I will go with Doctor Who because it's one show I've been staying constantly with.
Should say something other than Doctor Who. Let's expand the horizons of the people here.
Oh, go with It's About Time, Kathryn. You
No. Even back then, I knew it was a weird show. No, I'm gonna stick with Doctor Who.
Taylor?
If I can't pick Doctor Who according to the rules, yeah, I'll throw in some love towards the new one, Timeless. Timeless was a great show. It was cut, I think, prematurely. If it was given more time to grow, I think it would have gotten. It's not fantastic. It's not super heavy sci-fi, but it's very enjoyable, very watchable. Which, when you're talking about TV, that's really what you want.
And absent Doctor Who, I will stick also with Quantum Leap. I think Quantum Leap was one of the best examples of how time travel can be used to tell really emotionally involving stories. And it was a beautifully done show. Even though the ending was a little bit sad, I would recommend that to anyone as something to visit if they haven't ever seen it before.
So thank you, everyone. And for everyone who's listening, just remember there's a lot of other things going on with Console Room this year, even though we're virtual. So come over to our Discord channel and see what's happening. So have a good night, everyone. Adios.